제발님 좋아하시겠니? 알아서 매일 들어가 당시 인간다라 산다지 산다지는 그네 롱도 자동 롱도 틀리게 소리도 좋아하시겠 다니지 그게 산다 당시에
We have heard now about the setup of a body in its impure and in its pure state. And Kamachakma then continues to say that in the heart center, in particular, he says, within the heart center, there is the residence of the 42 peaceful deities. So if we were to view our bodies or look at our bodies in their pure form, in their purified form, purified of any obscurations, etc., and so forth, then we would consider the heart center to be the seat of the 24 peaceful types of Buddhas or awakened beings. We would imagine, as we have heard before, the central channel. At the heart center there are 8 channels which branch off into the cardinal and intermediate directions. And within these channels, then distributed in a certain way, we would find the 42 peaceful deities, as they're literally called, or just 42 peaceful ones. When beings pass away, they're going to be dead after that. And when they have died, before their consciousness goes for the next rebirth, we undergo an intermediate period that is known as such, the intermediate state, commonly known by its Tibetan name, Bardo. In this Bardo state, this intermediate state, on the first, second, third, etc. day, various Buddhas arise. Now, if we had familiarized ourselves during our lifetime with various types of Yidam meditations, and if we had familiarized ourselves with these various Buddha types, we would recognize these. They would, their appearance, which goes along with the brilliantly clear light, would not be anything scary or shocking for us. And accordingly, it is said that on the first day after having passed away, the brilliantly white light arises in the intermediate state that comes along with the appearance of the Buddha Vairocana. If we were to recognize the Buddha Vairocana at this particular point, we would immediately form the conscious thought or plea, please Buddha Vairocana, protect me, protect us from the fears and the terrors of the intermediate state. And with that we would already begin to dissolve into the heart of the Buddha Vairocana, thus gaining liberation already at that particular state. If it wouldn't work out on the first day, then on the second day the Buddha Akshobhya arises, on the third day the Buddha Ratnasambhava, on the fourth day it would be the Buddha Amitabha, and finally on the fifth day the Buddha Amoghasiddhi. So we have during these days the chance to recognize these Buddhas, dissolve into them, and thus gain liberation in the intermediate state before, rather than having to go through the prolonged intermediate state before we're being reborn again. These first couple of days of intermediate state are also known as the intermediate state of suchness, or as the Chönyi Bardo, as it is called in Tibet. So after death has been upon us, nevertheless a word of caution is in order, because not everything that appears is basically what we're looking for. By all means, some shape with horns and a funny face could appear, some kind of altogether odd shape. That clearly would not be Vajrayana Buddha, so do not mistake such strange shapes for the Buddha.
Make a Dharma about Tenga as a chamber yourself. There's a carbo trot on Mavakinsi, Chara Young Will. Hang around some, there's a carbo trot about Gargado, and I try to shoot some of your Marwa. Nobody knows that I try to chamber, there's a trot in Jiggy. The number knows it, and Jiggy or Mare, Georgie or Mate, Sonjig. Where's the carbo trot me about Hage, needs a Java Longy. Tell and Roger or Mare. Number knows it, that Jackson Road, somewhere. $10 Java ring, Tomji $10 Shavaripa.
So once we become aware of these lights after we have passed away, while we find ourselves in the intermediate state, the clear mark of the appearance of the Buddha Vajrayana is a brilliant, strong white light, which is for some by all means so brilliant that they would find it difficult even to look at it. And some might even be somewhat overpowered or even scared by this light and look for rather more diffuse corners of light which are not quite as brilliant. However, that would be rather a mistaken path. There are also other lights, less brilliant than the one that appears together with the Buddha Vajrayana. However, if we were to move into that direction, that would not be a path that leads to liberation, but it would rather be a path that leads to rebirth in the God realms. So therefore we ought to understand quite clearly that when these brilliant lights, white or of another color on later days, appear in the intermediate state, there is nothing to be afraid of whatsoever. There's nothing to fear in any which way whatsoever. These are none other but the manifestation of the totally awakened ones, of the various Buddhas which appear one after the other. And if we just were to go into that direction and ask for their guidance, place ourselves under their protection, well, that would then lead us on the path to liberation. Rather more avoid the lesser lights and go for the brilliant one.
Bardo number Shiva that two, Sabo Yore, Menshi Yore. I can't take it, Mega Song do, Ganga Hako do. And then Junker Yore, Gigi and something comes to court of Atlantic Junker Yore. I did a ten numbers on this. Oh, Danuma Tenny Lapsuma, Tati do something Hako Yore.
So we've been told now. The bad news is we'll forget again. The good news is that once we find ourselves in the intermediate state, we are endowed with a mental body, so to speak, and with an intelligence and an awareness that is utterly brilliant and utterly sharp. With this non-physical, with this mental body of a being of the intermediate state, and with the brilliant awareness and the intelligence of such a being, we could, for instance, perform all sorts of miraculous occurrences. And we will also, and that is the good news, remember at that time that we have heard these instructions, that we have been given these explanations, and then once these lights are upon us, once they shine up in the intermediate state for us, we will be able to remember. And then, of course, off you go.
I'm Drime so about Zinka, as Drime, Zanda Tamsi, the Tapa and Zink, also the Zinc Jigo. And then let them know the Tong up to Tamba, up to the Jigo, not to Naji. I tell you, the country, 자동 틀리 저동을 söylüyor sonra 자동 롱동 틀리게 나발한테 요요예요.
Furthermore, we learn from Kama Chakra that in our throat center, the throat center is the residence of the so-called 8 pure knowledge holders, or Vidyadharas, as it is called in the translation, knowledge holders, and that in the crown center, literally it says within the brain, there are the 58 blood drinkers, which means wrathful deities. As before, with the heart center, where we have 8 channel petals branching off from the central channel in the throat, we have 16 of these, and we have 32 in the crown of the head, or what is called the brain here. And these deities, the 8 pure knowledge holders, as well as the 58 blood drinkers or wrathful deities, reside there. These, as is also the case with the 42 peaceful ones in the heart, I believe I forgot to say that before, these do not appear in a particular shape such as deities with faces and hands and attributes. These are simply present as the subtle energy channels of our subtle body, as the currents or winds that move through them, and as the essences or drops which ride upon these winds. So there are no deities in any particular shape to be imagined as we would know them from paintings or from photos or whatever. They're simply present as prana, nadi, and bindu. Rinpoche continues to explain that because of a connection between the channels of the heart, the channel petals of the heart, and the eyes, based on the various practices of the Dzogchen tradition, there will be appearances of rainbow lights and spheres, etc., in space. Because all of these deities, no matter where they might reside as prana, nadi, and bindu within our subtle energy body, have their essential origin within the heart, and because the eyes and the heart are connected with subtle energy channels, if we were to train ourselves in such Dzogchen practices as Tögal, or direct crossover, or direct leap, as it is often translated, then if we attain proficiency in these practices, then if we look into space stably and undistractedly, these deities will arise, will become visible as different shapes, as spheres, and as rainbow lights. Rinpoche continues to explain that at the time of death, the deities of the body leave that body, and they then clearly appear, filling the whole of space and the sky. So once that body of ours dies off, so to speak, once it has drawn its last breath and lies still and dead, then these deities which heretofore have resided at particular points within our body then become clearly visible in space.
The high and more machine, the Deities, some more hinges also. Then Tony, and I was in the trauma, and in Jarro, and Tenga, then he, and Nagarjuna, don't go to the mother. The last condition one drain to my is not a more Mahasiddha thing.
However, if we do not recognize these deities, if we had not familiarized ourselves with what could possibly happen and would mistake them for something other than what they are, we could, by all means, think them to be, as it's literally called here, the messengers of the Lord of Death. We would experience them as terrifying, as frightening appearances, and we could either lose our consciousness or try to flee from them. All of that mistaken perceiving of them, however, would lead to nothing other than our rebirth in lower realms.
Then Drime, Long Swim, dying on the truth, then longer Chapter, and the Rinpoche was I don't know, Nagarjuna, Tropo has he taken, I go longer to Jolly, dry, that's it, I don't go Suma, yes, Suma, Sumu, that is Sumu, Naruka, Tropo, Sumu, Hammer, the daddy is on the truth on that. Jesus, he be Tebar, Tonga, draw. I tell a true dog. Maru was so many of my name. The dad is on the true dog. True dog, the Jesus, Gigi, that is the heart of something. Pelundu. That in it, there are not a tail. So on the sending is a drop on the true dog.
Dharma gives us an example to understand how this works. He says, for example, when on a road that has terrifying enemies or terrible dangers, one could also say, you think that those who have come to welcome you are enemies and flee away from them. This could by all means happen if you travel on a road that is unknown to you and you do not know, you're distrustful about whatever and whoever you could possibly meet on this road. Then if from a distance you see some who have actually come to fetch you, to guide you on that road, you mistake them for enemies, for robbers, for dogwhites of whatever sort, and being terrified you turn around and run as fast as you can, try to flee away from them, whereas it's actually friends who have come to help you through this difficult stretch of road. And it could become even worse, because if you then turn around to see what's happening, you would see that those who you mistakenly think to be enemies are actually following you. These would be your friends who have seen you from afar, and they've seen you turn around, so they run after you to catch up with you and fetch you, yet you are under the mistaken impression that they're enemies who've come to do you harm and run even faster. That could by all means happen in the same way in the intermediate state. If we're not in the know about that which we're about to encounter, if we misinterpret that which we encounter, and if we are terrified by it, then instead of opening ourselves up to that which is coming our way, we would close ourselves, we would run away, would flee away into a different direction, and exactly that would be, of course, the mistake. However, continues Karma Chakra, if you do recognize them, then you're not afraid, but happy. If you recognize them as the Idam deities, which they are, you will go to the pure ones. So if we should remind ourselves in the intermediate state that that which appears, that which arises, are not enemies, are not negative forces, but none other but the expression of awakened ones, of Buddhas or Idam deities for that matter, then we will happily receive them, we will happily turn towards them, and we will happily allow them to guide us to the pure realms, rather than run away and hide from them and end up in the lower realms.
괜히 다다 검지사를 되게 찔리듯이 따오 다 된다 말아서 어두니 야단하여 거를 사람들 그 야단하여 뭐시 벌사 지도 들이 다다 나눠서 소수 그 야단 깨름 감 깨름 맨날 야단하 건도 가보라 나랑 그러지 건도 가보 말이지 얘나 나로는데 야단하 그 건도 가보가 나와라 야 영천천 나랑라 서 이제 요 말이지 옛날에 난 도대체 못 지내서 나랑 서셔서 내가 되지 강 하대 강도 때문에 야단하 무엇이 벌사를 그 소리 Bardo 상기에
Rinpoche then accordingly continues to explain that if we were to familiarize ourselves with these points in our present life, then, and if we were to train accordingly, we would do so by way of, as he says here, at perceiving or looking at these spheres and the essences and the spots which come about as a result of the Turgal practice, or the practice of crossing over. That means to say, if we would train ourselves during this lifetime in the various practices of a certain deity, for instance, we would prepare ourselves for that which would eventually appear in the intermediate state after we have passed away. We would then be able to recognize that which appears to us as something friendly, as something helpful, and as something that we do not need to be afraid of, and we could then freely turn towards it. If, for instance, we were to train ourselves in the practice of great compassionate one, Chenrezig, who usually, or who often is depicted with white body color and 4 arms, it goes without saying that presently we do not look like this. Our body color is neither white nor do we have 4 arms. But if we train ourselves during a lifetime in identifying ourselves with this awakened form, or this expression of an awakened form, then when we would come across it in such a shape, in the intermediate state, we would recognize it. For instance, to say, if we would see the great compassionate one in the intermediate state face to face, we'd recognize him right away and would turn towards him rather than turn on our heel and run away from fear.
정체 Deities 정체 전부 제가 와요. 정체 되게 맨날 Deities. 바발로 주사한테 방갈라서 뒤가 잡고 제가 좀
Deities and 방갈라서 단지구도
아니거든. 아니 뒤에 정체 Deities 뒤에 놓는 롤리는 가사는 다니 그런 사마사키 그래서 로무롱 좋아 올보 로무롱 롤리 대 가사 그랬더니 제 거는 사마모 제도 전이 생기지 로켓도 그런 나타나서 파만이 요리.
It's a story about the Indian Mahasiddha Shavaripa, who was accepted as a student by the great master Arya Nagarjuna. At this time, Nagarjuna resided in the country of Bangala, which corresponds mostly to present-day Bengal, in the vicinity of a city that was known as Tirta. He lived in a thick forest in a mountainous region and in a cave there, and was a retreat there, so to speak. While in that town of Tirta, there was a couple who were performers of song and dance. They they earned their livelihood by performing in this way, traveling across the country as performers.
근데 간단하게 방안이라 보고 민보체 승무체 인도 근데 보고 민보체 문이 거기 나서랑 바발로 죽는다나 해보면 근데 바발로 죽는다나 코로니가 로로네 간단히 제법으로 근데 바발로 죽게 근데 가면 거기 가면 다 보고 놓네요 효성 근데 바발로 죽게 근데 사마몬보지
This couple also had a pair of children, a boy and a girl, who from their parents had learned the art of song and dance. And eventually it happened that these two children also came upon the cave of Nagarjuna. And in all likelihood he sat outside and they performed for him. He was greatly pleased by the children, and he then asked them inside his cave, and as sort of a present or as a sign of appreciation for the performance, he presented them with lots of food and drink. So as the children sat in the cave together with Nagarjuna and enjoyed the food and drink that he had offered them, they eventually took a look around, and it occurred to them that Nagarjuna, on the top of his head, he had fastened a little scroll, a painting, a rolled up painting, which we would call a Tenga nowadays, a small one. And the children then eventually asked him, what is that scroll on your head? What figure is painted on it? And Nagarjuna said, on this scroll there is a painting or there's a drawing of my own teacher, the Bodhisattva Ratnamati. So of course the children were curious after they had heard that this painting or drawing shows the teacher of Nagarjuna. They asked him, would it be appropriate if we saw him? Would we be allowed to see the picture? And Nagarjuna said, yes indeed, that would be okay. However, you being ordinary beings will not be able to see anything. As it is the custom with such pictures, we've got loads of them all around us. They also have a silk cover with which the picture can be covered. And then he eventually lifted that cover, and as he had told the children, and they stared hard at the painting, there was nothing to be seen for them. So as it goes with children. As it goes with them. Of course they were curious. They couldn't see anything, so the scroll appeared empty. And little children with their high-pitched voices, they went, oh, please, could we have a look, What could we do to look? And Arjuna, being like an elderly meditator with his deep voice, he said, well, indeed, if you wish, you would have to stay a few days. So he told them that if they really wanted to see the picture, then they would have to wait a little bit and in all likelihood do something, which we're probably about to hear now. So eventually, Nagarjuna then proceeded to let them know what was to be done in order to see, to truly perceive and behold that picture of which they couldn't see anything for the time being. He gave them the empowerment of the Chakrasamvara for the Chakrasamvara practice. He gave them the explanations of the Chakrasamvara Tantra, the reading transmissions, the instructions which are necessary to practice Chakrasamvara. And in this way, he fully taught them all the methods of both development as well as perfection process according to the Chakrasamvara Tantra. Then, after they had received these teachings and explanations thoroughly and in detail from Nagarjuna, he told them, well, off you go to the forest of Shavaripa. You go to this thick forest in the middle of which, in total seclusion, you can practice, you can train yourself, you are to train yourself in the practice of Chakrasamvara, and thus, through this practice, you are to bring about realization or an understanding of the true nature of appearances and phenomena of mind nature, for that matter itself. So leastways, finally they went off to that forest, at least certainly as the story tells us the boy did, and after much meditation, much practice in seclusion in that thick forest, eventually he gained all the accomplishments, all the realizations which had been brought about through the proper implementation of Chakrasamvara practice. In that forest there also was a steep cliff, a rock cliff, and he performed the miracle of walking up that perpendicular rock cliff up and down without any problems. He performed the miracle of flying from one mountaintop to the other, and all sorts of other miracles as a result of his realization of Chakrasamvara practice. And consequently, he became known on the basis of his realization and the miracles that he could perform as the Mahasiddha Shavaripa. Now, if we should entertain any hopes whatsoever to eventually do as the Mahasiddha Shavaripa did, well, then we had better sit down and put things into practice now, hadn't we? If that were the case, we could eventually perform the same sort of miracles as he did, fly about from mountaintop to mountaintop, walk up and down perpendicular rock cliffs, etc., and so forth. If we would entertain any hopes that this would eventually come to work out for us, we would have to actually sit down and learn how to recognize mind nature as it truly is. And if we do that, if we actually sat down to do so, then we would be well advised not to concern ourselves with any thoughts of the past or the present or the future for that matter. Whatever it is that has happened in the past is over with. It's done for. It's history. It's gone. So why concern yourself with it at this particular moment? Similarly with thoughts of the future. Whatever it is that you could possibly muse about, it's not upon you yet. It's of no interest for the present moment at all. It's totally irrelevant for the present moment. If we have dispensed with thoughts of the past or the future, of course there's still the present to worry about, and particularly as we sit here and try to meditate, we could give rise to all sorts of hopes and fears. We could immerse ourselves in hopes that our meditation practice may go well, that it will improve our understanding or insight, or that it might even improve mind nature itself. Of course, it would be totally unconstructive to concern ourselves with such thoughts or ideas in the first place. Similarly, we could be afraid that our meditation practice would be unsuccessful, or that mind nature might even deteriorate because of our unsuccessful practice. Needless to say, that is just as unconstructive and needless to think. So therefore, ridding ourselves of all of these hopes and ideas, these hopes and fears of improvement or deterioration, of thoughts of either the past, the future, or the present, simply allow yourself to rest in an uncontrived state. Anything other than that is contrivance that we can happily do without.
I draw you the 20
Short questions.